Hello, this is Anthony Diana from Reed Smith, and welcome to Tech Law Talks. Today, we are continuing a podcast series on AI-enabled e-discovery. This podcast series will focus on practical and legal issues when considering using AI-enabled e-discovery, with a focus on actual use cases, not just the theoretical. Joining me today is Dera from FTI, a good friend of mine and a good friend of Reed Smith for many, many years. So welcome, Dera.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Excellent. So Dera, let's talk about AI-enabled e-discovery. We know this is the new thing, particularly the use of GenAI and AI agents and all of that. And it's obviously a lot of change, right? A lot of change in the e-discovery field. It was been pretty static, I would say, for the past 10 years. And now there's a lot of change. So I think there's a lot of my clients are really interested in like what's happening out there, like what's available, what's good, what's bad, what challenges we have. So today I really wanted to sort of focus high level on what you're seeing, your opinions on things. So let's start with, Gen AI and AI agents and the like. What do you see in terms of the marketplace, in terms of where we are today versus where we're going to be in the next 1 or 2 years?
Okay. Well, that question's not broad at all, right? And the great irony, of course, is that e-discovery has been pioneering the use of AI for well over a decade, right? And so what's happening now is a completely different category of technology coming into the mix and various flavors of it. So, I'm not going to talk about the AI that we've been using for years, even though I think some people are suddenly realizing, oh, I have been using AI for years, right, in a CAL model or a TAR model. And we'll start to focus on the generative AI use cases and how that is starting to be used in e-discovery. And I think we're still at the beginning of it, right? Even though in the past year it has become much more pervasive and the quality of the technology baked into commonly available technology, right? Such as the relativity platforms or the reveal platforms or some of the cloud-based platforms, the quality is better. The interesting thing is this is the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better from here. So a lot of the use cases that we're seeing are early stage experimentation, but we are already starting to see trends and we are starting to identify places where it can have a real meaningful impact, not only on workflows, but on outcomes, either cost outcomes or speed outcomes. So I think we should start to dig into how that stuff is starting to show up.
Yeah, and I like to hear you because, again, I think I'm looking at it, and again, we talk about e-discovery, right? The EDRM, and we're getting questions about preservation, collection, review, production, privilege. I mean, there's so many different areas where it's in use, but obviously there's a lot of risk because it's new, right? And so, and I think just a level set, for the most part, actually, at least for the major ones, you have to be careful about going too far afield of the major players, but things like security, it's not using public ChatGPT. I think that's been pretty much resolved, right? Now you still have to do your due diligence, but in terms of other things, like where of the EDRM model, where are you seeing, or beyond that, but where are you seeing it? Where's the most opportunity today, right? If somebody uses it today, what should they say? Okay, I'm going to start. Let me start experimenting. What's the type of process or tools you think?
Yeah. A place where I am seeing good results, right? And by good results, I'm not saying perfect results, right? But a place that I am most interested in using it is at the earlier stages of the whole process. So starting to interpose generative AI at the earlier stage of discovery, including kind of as an ECA type mechanism. So I know a lot of people just want to go straight to the end, review my documents for me, right? At the very end of the process. But we've started to see some really good results when we get a lot of inbound documentation that we don't have a good sense of what its contents might be. Using LLMs to summarize or provide us with inventories or lists of what's inside to give us a sense of, is this something that should actually go into the discovery workflow? Should it be processed, right? And at that, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be directionally accurate or even able to interrogate it or learn what questions or what keywords to ask at a very early stage when you're starting to think about discovery planning. There are some great opportunities to reduce volumes, improve speed to understanding, and start to help it, can start to help you understand the nuance of the case a bit earlier. And that's a tremendous advantage.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a sea change because I think, normally the way this works, right, whether it's complaint, an investigation and like usually say, okay, we have to start the review. I think even though we have had ACA tools and like, I don't know how much they've really been used. I completely agree. The speed to knowledge, particularly early on, and I've used it for a case where you get all your documents and then the first thing you do is put in the AI tool and you just get, timelines and people and it surfaces who do I need to talk to and you can ask and it depends on the tool. Not every tool is slightly different, but I agree. I think this is going to be best practice is the first thing you do is gather documents and put in the AI tool because it doesn't cost that much, right? You're not starting a huge review process, whatever. And I think it's also important. It's not reviewers. This is partner level. Like once it's done, the partners that the client can really understand the issues of the case or start understanding the issues of the case. And I think that's massive opportunity for everybody.
Massive opportunity. A particularly great use case, and this is a file that my colleague did, so I can talk about what happened, but I can't talk about it with extreme granularity. But there was a very significant inbound production from opposing party, right? Very significant. I don't want to say it was a data dump, but it was voluminous because of the nature of the case and the issues in the case. So we had a very senior associate, an extremely knowledgeable, experienced practitioner, work with our data scientist to train an LLM in the issues of that case and in the law and in the domain area of that client. So train an LLM. And then we had that LLM review a subset of the corpus, right? So 500 documents to identify what was responsive. And then we fed that into the traditional TAR model, right? And then we did an iterative process to be able to surface documents from the inbound collection. And the lawyer was so impressed with that process, right? The degree to which the documents were accurately summarized, correctly reflected the risk and the issues, surfaced additional information, proposed additional inquiries, and then the way the TAR model performed as a result. And because that they went through 4, 5, or 6 rounds, right? So, reviewed about 2 or 3,000 documents, but out of a very significant inbound corpus to be able to surface what was really necessary to be reviewed to prepare for the next steps, right? The
Yeah.
depositions and the next steps. That they then said, well, you know what? We're going to do this against our own outbound productions, which was
Yep.
also voluminous. And while we
Yep.
have all done this, it's all various reviewers. We have various leads on top of that process, and there's a certain degree of normalization. But having that LLM process on top of it with a highly trained, specialized LLM, I think is going to be a game changer as well for
Yep.
true understanding and case development.
And I totally agree. I think, and again, and I could certainly see it, particularly for investigations, right? Where you're rushing to get the production out and you're doing the review, but sometimes you still don't really like the people really don't know when you're producing it. Say, okay, you can obviously use it for QC, but I think the idea of when you get it, you just run the tool. So, because look, what I'm going to tell people, which I think is true, the SEC is going to do it. The plaintiffs, everyone's going to do it. Your production set, they're going to put it in an LM and nobody's going to review every document anymore. They're just going to use the tool. You might as well see what they're going to find, right? Like it's like you're going to see exactly what they're seeing, which is remarkable in some ways. But that also is scary because they're going to have speed to knowledge and they're going to really understand the case, right? Or the investigation pretty quickly. So, yeah, I do think it's going to accelerate both those things, both early case assessment, which is helpful, much more. And then at the end, when things are actually produced, both sides are going to have a much better understanding of what are the key issues, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like you said, the depositions, it's going to be it's going to level the playing field. Like we're all going to be looking, I mean, it's different tools, but it's going to be pretty close, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone's going to have a pretty same view of the strengths and weaknesses of allegations and the like. So
Well,
it's going to be fascinating.
that's going to be great, I think, because then really it will require both sides to really form a point of view of the validity of their case and the angles of attack and how it might be prosecuted earlier on, which will lead to potentially different litigation strategies. And I think the interesting thing is I've sat back and reflected on this, right? When you're leading a very large team in litigation, you're always having that multiple perspectives, and that multiple perspectives on the corpus of data, the evidence is very important. But having a single view about how does this all tie together, that's what a lot of teams have really struggled to do, is get a uniform view. And having an LLM be a uniform view that you can then test your own biases, hypotheticals, scenarios against, I think will just improve strategic decision making.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think the other thing that you sort of pointed out, which I do think, and again, this is one of the things I think the industry is going to have to figure out is like TAR has been very effective, right? It actually works. Um, One of the challenges, which you sort of talked about, is to train the model takes time. I do think, like you sort of said, that having Gen AI help with that initial training set and figuring it out will bring down those costs, right? And hopefully have like this, like the whole point of TAR was supposed to be a senior associate, like you just said, would actually be the ones reviewing those documents. I'm not sure how much that actually happens because oftentimes clients, for cost reasons, were like, well, we'll have someone else do it. But I do think that'll also help. And it also speeds it up, right? They want to get started with the production. You can say, look, let's do Gen AI. One, we have the early case assessment. That'll help quite a bit. And then two, let's do some training and then actually still use TAR for producing the documents and review, in part because it's accepted by the other side, right? It's court accepted. You don't have to worry about disclosure and all that kind of crap. You could just really say, look, we're using TAR. It's accepted. Everyone's accepted it. And you don't have to get into, I used Gen AI and there's going to be all kinds of issues about disclosure and what prompt did you use. And like, we know that's going to be litigated, but you're avoiding all that and you're still getting the benefit, some real benefit on the production side. Okay. And then anything else that you're seeing? Are you seeing anything on the privilege side? I know it's early days and I know people
Yeah.
want to, but
Yeah.
what do you see on the privilege side?
I think there's still some room for improvement, both in LLM output quality and evaluation, and just also in workflow. Privilege is one of those areas where people are rightly focused on accuracy. And a lot of people want to use the LLM to review the document and do an individualized document assessment. And I've tended to avoid that.
Yeah.
We may get there at some point, but I think where we've seen greater success, and this continues to be a work in progress, is really triaging the documents. LLM is a countermeasure. So, like when we're putting it through TAR, we're often using keywords or supplementation to do an initial screening, and then you're putting eyes on a lot of that stuff. But using LLM as a secondary check to also evaluate the document. So if your traditional method and your LLM both agree that the document is likely to be privileged, you put it into a human-based workflow and do the analysis. If they both agree it's not privileged, it's probably not. Where there is a conflict between the two, that goes in through a screening mechanism. So we've started to experiment with that, and the early indications is that that's going to be a very promising mechanism to streamline the workflow and triage documents more effectively into
Mm.
different workflows, which itself can improve the overall speed of the privilege process. You're also then
And I
using
would
those.
say this, the other key point for that, which I think is key for our clients out there from a cost perspective, because it's usually when does the law firm have to look at something versus when can you use your contract attorneys? They're doing privilege, but if you have the contract attorney says privilege and the tool says privilege, you do it. You could obviously say, you know what? I'm not going to have the law firm look at it. Again, that's a risk decision. You may not want to do it individually, maybe do a sample to make sure it's working, but I see that as a huge cost save. And it obviously helps with the risk as well. And that's what we're talking about, triaging. And then where there's
Triage.
conflict, that's when you have the associate at the law firm at whatever $100 an hour, $800 an hour, look at it and say, okay, yeah, this is the right decision. I do think that's certainly going to be the next phase for privilege, and then we'll see how it develops over time. But I
Yep.
tend to agree with you there.
That's right. So we're seeing some really good techniques. Again, training that LLM to understand the case, understand the context, giving it instructions about privilege in context so that the determinations are being made with a, specifically trained LLM. We're also starting to use it with certain types of document summaries to facilitate the generation of the privilege log. So a lot of the stuff that is automated, not everything can be automated. So supplementing some of that automation process with LLMs is also, again, improving preliminary outputs and then improving the speed at which a final log entries can be
Okay.
drafted. It's so
Interesting.
helpful with that process.
Have you seen any use or good uses of AI agents yet in the discovery process?
I'm seeing a lot of experimentation. I haven't seen anything where I'm prepared to say that this is
Good
ready,
use. Yeah,
a
that's what
good
I think.
use,
Yeah, that's
ready.
my impression is it's everyone's looking at it. And obviously there should be good use cases for it, but I haven't seen yet someone say here's an AI agent that can do QC or whatever it is. I
XYZ
mean,
or
obviously,
QC or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah. So we are seeing, I wouldn't say like quite agentic behavior, but we're seeing LLMs trained to perform tasks that I think will
yeah,
be taken over by agents.
yeah,
Again, I think we're at the worst that this technology is. And I think even more than deploying the technology, what I've really been focused on is defining the use cases where we are going to get a meaningful and accurate result, and that there's a way that we can check it and benchmark it against our expectations, right? That's always what it was. If we start to have discomfort with the process, like, can we explain what's going on? Can we document what's going on? And to not have it substitute foundational decision making where it really
yeah.
shouldn't be, where it really is implementing instructions or providing output for further human review, tend to be good use cases where like a high degree of benefit can obtain, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, like, and I think we've learned a lot of lessons learned from when, technology system review came out or whatever. Even though we got the courts, there was a lot of people had bad experiences because of all the challenges. And then people stopped adopting it. I think to your point originally, I think we're going to see a large adoption of tar now just
Mhm.
because people are focused on it and realize, okay, you know what? We may have had a bad experience 10 years ago, but we now know the good, bad, and the ugly about it and how best to use it. So
Well,
we can only hope.
people adopt tar, but not realize that it's AI because they now
Yeah,
associate AI with generative AI, right?
yeah,
So now they see
absolutely.
tar as like automation, which is kind of funny. So
Yeah,
I also wanted to talk about like one of my favorite use cases,
yeah,
right? And this is actually very important. There's still a lot of cases that deal with historical records or handwritten records. And really handling handwritten records can be challenging, right? There are a lot of things that will OCR that documentation. But when you get into cursive writing, the quality of the OCR can be really quite terrible, right? Really, really quite terrible. So we've been innovating with some processes to not only use a different mechanism of OCR using AI enablement to improve the quality of the OCR, but to then run an LLM on top of that OCR to predict likely words and improve the overall quality. It is remarkable. It is
yeah,
remarkable. I've had a lot of cases with handwritten notes, historical data, a lot of medical notes where looking at the record, I can't make out the handwriting. And then when I see the AI, the LLM generated post OCR cleanup, I'm like, oh, now I know what this is saying. That's obviously what it's saying. And then to have all of that available within indexes for searching is transformative in cases where there's large volumes of documentation.
yeah. I've heard also from others, like particularly where you have a lot of PDFs or designs, like where that is something that type of data. Like because obviously AI can work on images, that it actually does a really good job using image technology, not necessarily the LMs, but the image technology, which is
MMMs,
fascinating to me.
summarizing.
So it'd be again, I think we're early days and everybody's going to figure this out. But I think, as we all said, there are so many use cases right now that people can. I think the theme is you can use it now, right? There's no reason not to start using it. And again, I think everything that we've talked about is relatively low risk, right? We're not getting into, which I keep hearing, the other side is never going to let me. Like most of the stuff we just talked about, you don't need the other side to agree to anything, right? It's early case assessment. Again, you may have to get approval to run the AI tool in their production, but that's a security confidentiality issue. You just deal with that. But it's not getting into what are my prompts, how am I using it, which I think is really beneficial. So I do think, and again, I think we're starting to see like this year is going to be the use of Gen AI. I think almost
And there's
every
going to be
case is going to start using it. Yeah,
some cases where there's a huge amount of video, audio, finding
yeah,
stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, I do this like when I make my own videos to entertain my family, just say, hey, here's a whole bunch of videos. Find me where somebody says X or find me where somebody says Y, right? Like with audio and video technology, which increasingly is prevalent in discovery corpuses. I mean, it's going to make a difference to our ability to get through that stuff quickly.
Okay. Well, Dara, thank you so much. I think this was great. I think you gave a really good summary of where we are and where we're heading. And like I said, I think the theme is if you're not using GenAI, start using it. So thank you very much. And we'll talk soon. And everyone else, please, I hope to hear from you. And obviously, this podcast is a part of a series. So hope you join us next time. Thanks. Bye.
Tech Law Talks is a Reed Smith production. Our producer is Shannon Ryan. For more information about Reed Smith's emerging technologies practice, please email techlawtalks@reedsmith.com. You can find our podcast on all streaming platforms, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at reedsmithllp. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers.